Are you an academic and is your university moving to a two-lane system? Are you unsure of what to do in regards to assessment, risks, and learning? The University of Auckland asked me to unpack my knowledge on all these issues. So here it is. Here's a recording. I hope it helps. Okay, thank you, everybody. It's a huge pleasure to be here. Thank you for the honor. So my presentation is going to cover three main areas. One, we're going to look at risks. Then we're going to look at defense, which is how do we help students protect themselves from themselves, and offense, how do we use AI to support learning and assessment. These three topics have come from a discussion with your learning and teaching team. So pretty much all the insights and research that I'm going to talk about today comes from A squared I, E squared C, which is our research center. It comprises over 60 researchers from over 25 different universities. Now, my number one takeaway is that I class generative AI as just a tool. And I know people have different sides of it, but for me, the reason why I call it as a tool is because it makes it very explicit that the human must always be held responsible for its usage and always in control. For me, every other use case is simply a use case of AI as a tool. Now, the great thing about tools is that they can be used in many different ways. However, sometimes that use can be used for productive purposes, and sometimes it can be used in very bad ways. And what our task as educators is to simply help students identify the right ways of using such a tool, and encouraging them and preventing them and educating why not to use it in the wrong ways. So there are a whole range of different risks associated with using AI or generative AI. Some are positive risks, some are negative risks. When I do many of my presentations, most of the concern when it comes to universities is what are the risks of cheating. On another note, slightly less focused, a lot of university staff are very concerned about the risks of de-skilling, especially when it comes to over-reliance and the impact that they have on critical thinking and other things, and it comes to bias and misinformation. There are a whole range of other risks, but they usually start to be less important as we go down the list. And the key thing for us as a university is that we need to really conduct a risk assessment. Conducting a risk assessment is a very standard process in engineering, but we need to be thinking about, what are the risks of moving or changing my assessment or moving to a two-lane approach, etc. And if you're unsure of how to conduct the risk assessment, in the supplementary materials of the paper QR down the bottom, links you to what is the process of completing this with AI in mind. Now, one of the reasons why we want to check for risk is that AI definitely has a whole range of ethical considerations and also business implications. This is a fictitious example, but it's something that could become very, very real if we're not careful. We want to ensure that the reputation of our universities stays strong and students don't start blacklisting because students are graduating with competencies that they don't actually have. So there are a range of different observations. One is that I recommend that if you're not using AI, don't teach with it. What generally happens in that scenario is that you start to complicate things for the students and you create a lot of confusion. The other recommendation that I would make is that AI does not need to be every subject. Just because one of your assessments is uncontrolled, it does not mean that you need to be teaching AI or integrating AI to complete that uncontrolled assessment task. But what you do need to do is you need to be aware that students may be using AI, or they may be using a contract cheater to complete that assessment task. So that is where the differentiation occurs. The other observation is that I can provide you all the advice in the world in this presentation, but for the great majority of staff to be able to move forward requires workload and institutional support. If there is no workload support, many staff members will not have the capacity to investigate and integrate AI or make changes to their subjects to become two-lane capable beyond the very basics. So we need to keep that in mind. Which leads us to key takeaway 2, is that each institution, each faculty, each staff member needs to understand the different tensions and work out where across those tensions they sit and what they need to do to get those tensions into some form of balance. The capability of generative AI is moving faster than we can defend against it, and you need to ask yourself, how important is it to manage these risks? So cheating has always been an issue. The need for controlled and uncontrolled assessments has always been there because a large proportion or growing proportion of assessments that are uncontrolled have been going towards contract cheating. Sometimes it might be to a paid service directly to another human being. In recent years, that has been offloaded to IT sites where they're using technologies to help. I guess the difference now is that AI cheating is changing the accessibility. When it comes to contract cheating, somebody had to take a risk of paying somebody, being unknown whether they were actually going to get the service that they paid for. And then they had the risk of, am I going to be blackmailed into the future? And when it comes to AI cheating or any type of cheating, we have to understand that no assessment is cheat-proof. If you think your assessment is cheat-proof, it simply means that you're struggling with the lack of imagination. And that's a famous quote from Philip Dawson that I really love to share. And if you really want to learn about assessment security, looking at the work of Philip Dawson is a really good starting point. Now, back in 2023, we did a lot of work on stress testing, and we continued it in 2024. And our work already is way out of date in terms of capability, but it provided a very good benchmark to say that, hey, across all our different assessment tasks, if they are uncontrolled, the generative AI can either get students over the passing line, because P's mean degrees, or they can partially help students pass different assessments. And if you're looking at different strategies in terms of how we can secure assessments or how we have to move forward, if you look at table 10 on the paper that's QR coded, that will give you a good starting point of the type of thought processes to apply to your assessment thinking. Now, I'm going to take one assessment type as an example. And the point of this is to demonstrate that generative AI is currently the least capable it will ever be. And it is increasingly being able to do more for students to not only get them to above 50% for a P's mean degrees, but to actually get them to a higher mark. The interesting thing that is coming out in research is that a lot of students aren't going for 100% in their assessment tasks if they are cheating. They are falling short in order to be able to disguise themselves so that the curve looks as expected. There's not a distortion. So if we look back at 2023 in terms of ChatGPT against the online quiz, It was text only, and it was more or less very inaccurate in a lot of topic areas. It was very easy to continue using an online quiz simply by using a lot of figure and text style questions. However, not long after that, ChatGPT 4 was released, and what it did do was improve your accuracy. Hallucination rates reduced a little bit. It could get students over the line with a lot more ease. And the solution still was, let's use figures and text-styled questions in quizzes. That will slow students down. However, a little bit after that, ChatGPT 4.0 came out, and that led to multimodal, where voice and image, etc., could now be incorporated into the conversations. And what that meant was that, okay, you can still use figures and text-styled questions, but now you've got to make it more complex, make it more difficult. Then came along ChatGPT 5, accuracy improved further, image interpretation increased, and now really online quizzes is only for low-stake learning activities where you're trying to inspire learning, not measure learning. If you're still using online quizzes, unless you've really stress tested your content area, you're really running a huge risk. Not only that, but with ChatGPT 5, we really have started entering the era of agents. And what does that mean? That means students can create agents, such as log into my Moodle site for whatever subject and complete the week 1 online quiz. If the student gives the AI the credentials, the AI can navigate to the Moodle site, log in, access the correct site, and find and complete the week 1 online quiz. Now that is a very basic student. A more advanced student would say, every Monday at 7 AM, log into all my Moodle sites and complete all the quizzes due this week. So we have to be aware that this is the capability, and this capability is advancing month in, month out. It is moving faster than we can protect against it. So the reality is that if you can't see the work carried out, you need to assume that the student may have used AI as a tool, which leads us to 2 lanes, why you have a controlled lane and an uncontrolled lane. Even if you don't want to teach AI, you need to assume that a student might have used AI, or they might have used a contract cheater. Now, most academics think that the best possible assessment task is the pen and paper exam. It is, in fact, probably one of the strongest assessment methods. You can see what students are doing, you can do it at scale. And while cheating is difficult, it is not impossible. Back when I was a student in the day, I knew of heaps of students that were finding ways to cheat in pen and paper exams. Now, there are ways that students could currently use AI to give them a competitive advantage when it comes to face-to-face exams. And one method is to predict exam questions. So if I was a student and I could go onto Course Hero and I could download exams from the subject for the last 5 years, I could say, okay, generate a whole range of different questions that would predict what I'm going to be sitting. Now, this is not necessarily a bad thing. If students are actually using those questions to learn, that can translate into better performance and better learning by the student if used in the right way. However, technology is constantly changing. Are we going to have to get to the stage where you're going to complete the pen and paper exam, and are you going to have to get a device that scans every student's glasses to see if they are AI glasses? We're not only thinking about AI glasses, but there's work being conducted on AI contact lenses. Are we going to have to scan every person's eyes to see whether they are using AI? Beyond that, sometime into the future, we're going to have chips planted into human brains. Are we going to be checking for that? So regardless of what we are doing now, what we understand as a controlled environment is going to evolve. And one way or the other, we are going to have to be a part of that evolution. We are going to have to make shifts. And this is going to create workload and policy implications. Another very talked about assessment task is oral assessment. And the type of oral assessment you use really depends on the learning objectives, like every other assessment. If we are looking at presentation skills, the use of AI is fine. It can help them with their slides, it can help them with notes, and so forth. If all we're looking at is how comfortable, how capable is a student in presenting information, that's a good example of AI integration. Another opportunity is if the assessment is looking at student learning. Are they capable of learning? And in that case there, you would use something like an oral viva. And the idea is through like an interview process, we see what the student can learn. But a student can still use AI to help them. Again, it comes down to predictive. If I was to upload the course materials, if I was to upload previous exam questions and so forth, I could type in a prompt such as use all this information, give me the 15 most likely questions I would be asked in an oral viva. If I was to memorize all that information and if I was good enough at cheating, I could mix and match those responses and information to get something that at least passes. Now, in some ways, that is okay if memorization or the process of at least learning that little bit of information is a key learning goal. It really depends on what is your focus. Now, the next issue with oral vivas is that you have to think about scalability. How big is your class resource? So before I got into the generative AI space, I did lots of work on laboratory learning. And one thing that we learned through the research data is that there is a lot of exam leakage that occurs. There are only a set amount of questions or styles that can be used if you want to try and create fairness across all students. You know, your question set has to ensure that one question is not completely different or a different level of difficulty to what you're going to be asking someone else. So what happens is that in that lab exam environment, you set an exam. There is only a set amount of students that can sit that exam at a certain amount of time based on the equipment that you have. So you have repeat sessions. The data always shows that for each class after the first lab exam occurred, the median marks continually increased. So if you were the student who sat the exam in the first lot, you were pretty much guaranteed that your mark would be less than the mark that did it maybe 4 versions over. So that's something that you have to be very careful about when looking at an oral viva approach. So is there any reason to have uncontrolled assessments or unsecured? Why do we have them? We still need such assessment tasks because university is not just about measuring competencies. It's also about helping students learn. And we know through lots of research that assessments actually motivate and encourage students to learn. And it requires our shift in this new environment to really focus in on how do we motivate students to learn, to complete an assessment task, when AI completely unmotivates a student to learn. So the motivation of what we thought we could use an assessment for, it's really starting to change. And that leads us to our 2-lane policy of uncontrolled or unsecured, unsupervised, or use the terminology used by the University of Western Sydney is inspire assessments. How do we create uncontrolled assessments to inspire students to learn? And this is all about assessments for learning. Our controlled assessment are the assessments that try and assure learning. These are assessments of learning. And the challenge becomes for all academic staff is how do we find balance between the two? In my school, within my university, the first thing I did was I undertook an audit of all our subjects. And the purpose of the activity was to see what is our risk profile. And for any department that is looking to understand where do we start first, I really encourage you to conduct such an audit. And I have a tool which I used, which you can download. There's instructions there to help you map out the information and help you think about which subjects do you approach. It's always best, you can't complete everything in one go. It is always best to look at the most at-risk subjects and start the careful pedagogical design thinking and processes there rather than going everywhere, especially trying to use lots of workload that we don't have on subjects that are already fairly secure. That is my advice. So I'm going to stop there and provide an opportunity for questions. All right, so now we move on to the second stage, which is defense. And the foundational goal of defense is to help students understand how AI can impact and benefit their learning and capability. Now, what we know is that between 80 to 95% of students are already using it in some form of their studies. So it's not whether do we encourage it or not encourage it, they're using it. So how do we get them to use it in a way that we can protect themselves from doing something that they shouldn't be doing that will impact themselves and their future? So what the rest of this presentation is about is shifting our focus. It's about shifting it away from cheating and thinking about learning. How does AI impact learning? Now, I want to start off with something that I did when it was summer, on our summer break. I did a bit of painting, and a part of that painting was to fix some cracks in my ceiling. I had never done this before. How did I do it? I went and found a video on YouTube. The video was 13 minutes long. I probably watched 5 to 6 minutes of that video. I fast forwarded to the bits that I needed. Then I applied some thinking about what do I need to buy, what's available here, how am I going to complete it with my conditions, what are my previous experiences, synthesized it all together, and was able to do something that I had never done before. A key reason why I was successful is because I have developed through my entire education and my career a whole range of transferable skills. If I think back to my engineering degree as a student, I was able to gain a whole range of psychomotor skills. None of those skills related to, using a scraper on the ceiling, but those hand movements translated into a skill that I could adapt to. I also knew how to problem solve, how to adjust to errors when they occurred, and so forth. So at the heart of everything that we do in education, more and more it's important that we have alignment with those transferable skills. So regardless of what we do in higher education, that can translate into any job or any experience in our future lives. The World Economic Forum, they hold a survey every 5 years where they survey employers to understand what are the skills needed by your organization. And they change from year to year. And this is from the most recent survey. One of the biggest jumps was AI and big data. I think that was about 80 places or so. I can't remember the exact number. But if you have a look at this list, you will see that there are a whole range of human skills, emotional intelligence skills. It's not a huge technical list of skills. And what this highlights is that for higher education institutions, there is still a huge opportunity to educate students. These are skills that AI can't really teach on their own. The same survey also determined what are the barriers to AI adoption. And there are two key areas of real highlight. One is the lack of skills to support adoption, which is not surprising because most universities at this stage here were not teaching students how to use AI. So they have little understanding. And another is the lack of vision among managers and leaders. I have been a part of a whole range of different panel sessions with industry leaders where they asked, how do you want our students to use AI? How do you want AI skills to come into the workforce? And pretty much a very common response is that what they are looking for is students that can bring them some idea of how they can bring AI into the workflow processes of their organization. Because currently, most of the staff, or at least the managers, have no idea how to do it. So if they can even bring an idea, that is a huge help. So there is an opportunity for universities to support industry by actually enabling AI integration into the curriculum. Now, in saying that, there are huge tensions between industry and in terms of learning. And one component of that is that I keep hearing industry say that, well, at university, you care about things like plagiarism and so forth. But in our organization, we don't care where the student gets the information, who they copy it from. As long as it's legal, we want the student to be able to complete the task as efficiently, as productively as possible. While in university, we care about learning. We care not only about the task, but setting students up for the future. And it's about finding that balance. And when it comes to AI, while it's all talked about productivity, what research is strongly showing us is that access to AI does not equal to capability to use it for efficient and productive means. There is lots of evidence out there that AI is actually causing unproductive practices, causing AI slop. And this is because students or staff, etc., have not developed the correct skills and thinking processes to enable productivity to occur. Again, this creates an opportunity for higher education providers to develop skills in students that will be useful for the workforce. We also know that AI, as well as generative AI, is not foolproof. It creates errors. You can't delegate accuracy, you have to audit it. So we need to make sure that our students that graduate don't make huge mistakes that cause corporate embarrassment. At the end of the day, that then reflects upon the education from the student. We need to teach them how to use these technologies. We need to give them the correct literacies. Now, when it comes to learning, there has been lots of research undertaking when students have open access. So you've got your 2 lanes and you say, okay, I know for uncontrolled, you might want to use it, you're going to use it. But there's growing evidence that if we don't guide students, they hit a brick wall. They spend an entire session using AI in ways where they think they are learning, but it is all an illusion. When it comes to that controlled assessment, they hit a brick wall, they fail, they don't achieve how they should achieve. This requires some support from us to help them knock down any misconceptions that they have, their wrong approaches. If we just say, hey, you can use it, go for it, we're leading our students down a wrong path. So if we look at the learning pyramid, now use this as a guide, the percentages are research backed, but the scaffolding does work. Most students use AI in ways that are very superficial. Explain to me why does something occur? Help me solve something. Help me find something. Do it for me. They see information on the screen, they read it, and they think that they have learned. But any good educator knows learning does not occur like that. It occurs through repetitive practice. It occurs through engaging with errors, learning through experiences, learning through learning through different variations of different tasks. And that is what we need to get embedded into the students' brains, in that learning takes work. If you apply no effort to your learning, you get no reward. So these higher levels of opportunity are being impacted because students are reverting to ways that they won't remember. So what we're aiming for in terms of protecting students is creating a mind shift. What we want to focus on is changing students from thinking, this is how I believe I can use AI to learn and be more effective, to this is how I know I can use AI to learn and be more effective. So the key fourth takeaway is that students are not experts. If you were looking at the HD type student, they are generally already using a paid version. I have seen examples of top performing students grouping together and paying like the $200 paid versions and then sharing the logins, so they get access to all the greatest bells and whistles. And generally they're capable, and they're generally very aware of the impacts of AI and learning. When we look at our high credit distinction type students, they're generally already competent with generative AI, but they need further refinement and guidance. However, the biggest risk occurs for the rest of the cohort. They are generally using it in ways that leads to bad learning habits and engagement with hallucinations. So this is, for the most of the cohort, we really need to implement something such as sex education. Now, why do we apply sex education? We apply it because, one, we know that most students are not mature enough yet. But if we look the other way, bad things can happen to their lives. It might be an unwanted pregnancy, it might be an STD or something like that. And two, we know that a great percentage of students are going to do it anyway. So we teach them of the risks and we try to protect them from themselves because they're not ready. So we need to do the equivalent right now at a foundational level of AI education, helping students learn the risks to their learning and to their careers if they don't understand how AI can impact their learning processes. Now I'm going to present a few slides from Jason Lodge. And this is about learning and how metacognition processes occur. And if we look at early childhood education, most of our focus is on implicitly making students aware of this is how you learn to learn. And there's a lot of acquisition of knowledge occurring, a little bit of that participating in thinking. When we get to senior secondary, most of the focus has been on acquisition, a little bit on learning how to learn, a little bit about that participating in thinking. We've kind of learned that such methods aren't really good. And when blended or flipped classes were learned, when we says, go and learn all your information before you come to class so we can do interactive activities together, we really increased the participating in thinking and learning. The more students learn by doing, the more they're going to learn, the more they're going to retain that information. However, a big risk of AI is that it's not just cognitive offloading that occurs, but it is metacognitive offloading. Students start losing the ability to think about their thinking. And what that requires is our needs start to get explicit. So if we were to consider how students might be moving towards AI use, you might be looking at something like this. And that could lead to very bad outcomes for the student's future. So if we look at that model, when you're looking at AI integration, and I look at the video that I talked about when I had to fix the crack in the ceiling, the acquisition was the easy part. It was watching the video, understanding the materials, the steps, and the order. But when I think about what else I needed to do to become successful for the future, I needed to think about the participating in thinking. And this is about engaging my brain while I'm doing it. I had to ask myself questions such as, why use this filler instead of that one? I had to notice that my ceiling didn't have a straight line, it had a zigzag line. How do I do things differently? How do I adjust? How do I learn from errors? How do I fix up the filler if it cracked again? And I also needed to understand learning how to learn. Being able to fix any future crack without a video. That involved understanding why each step works, diagnosing new types of cracks, elevating different methods or tools, and learning fast the next time. So this is a way of thinking about how do we transition our approaches. And this leads us to CAC Co-Intelligence, a framework that I put together and have been teaching and is being rolled out across courses around Australia. And I'm going to cover what is it and why is it needed. I want you to consider 3 different metrics. One is speed, or in terms of productivity, how fast can you get the job done? The next is how much are we going to learn and retain by completing that activity? And third is risk. What is the chance that the output actually meets our requirements? Now, what I show here is more for visual effect rather than technical accuracy, so just keep that in mind. If we think about just using our brain, it is definitely the slowest way of doing something, but it is definitely a great way to ensure that we're learning and retaining that information. In terms of risk, it is very low, assuming that we have the appropriate experience and skills. You get into the workforce, you might be asked to do something that you don't have the appropriate experience and skills for. Then the risk profile changes. How do we counter for that? At the opposite end of the spectrum, the fastest way is simply just use AI, get the answer. However, we're not going to learn and retain anything because we didn't apply any thinking to that. And risk is high because we haven't checked the output. This is where we get into co-intelligence. And co-intelligence is coined from Ethan Malik. He has a really good book on the topic if you haven't read it today. And that's about combining the best of the human with the best of the machine. At one end, we have the process of using our brain. And if we use our brain first, it is a slow process, but it enables us to learn and retain that information. We can augment what we did with our brain with AI, but if we stop there, it's high risk because we don't know what changes the AI made to what we originally did as a human with our thinking. The opposite of that is to use AI first, and then we apply our own thinking to check what the AI has done. But the risk here is one, it can lead to biases right from the very start. It can control the way that we're going to think about a problem. And skipping that first thinking step also impacts our learning and retention. So the best compromise is CAC, which is cognitive AI cognitive, or you can also think of it as thinking AI thinking. And it comprises 3 key steps. One is the first stage is about thinking first, about planning and preparing. It's about reflecting on proven methods, and very importantly, about the ethical implications of what you're doing, especially if you're thinking about how AI can enhance your work. The next stage is about using AI to augment what you were doing in stage one. It is not about replacing you. And we talk straight about generative AI in many contexts, but generative AI is not generally the only AI tool. There are a multiple range of AI tools, so we need to be thinking about what is the right type and model, and being aware that the AI outputs can be flawed. The third step is to apply that evaluative judgment to refine and validate the outputs, and very importantly, apply human touches, responsibility, and control. And this is not just a once-off process, this is an iterative process. And it is connected to self-regulated learning, where we think about forethought, performance, and self-reflection. And they are connected in this way, which makes this process so effective. There are times that you would want to apply CAC Co-Intelligence, and that should only be when you're an expert in both AI integration and the field that you're working with. Because the risk with AI is that if you are experienced, it is extremely powerful and useful. But if you don't have the right experience, it is extremely dangerous. And we have to get that message across to students. So if you were to do it, you have to be explicit. And explicit on two fronts. One, on this is the 3 stages of thinking, but also this is about learning. You have to be explicit about what learning is occurring at 3 stage. You need to get that learning how to learn component across in the activities that you carry out. If you think you can show students once, then expect no impact. We know through our studies that repetition is needed to help enact some sort of change. And again, emphasize that it is an iterative process. So I'm going to go through an example of how would you do this. And the example that I'm using here is in a workshop activity. So you've got students in a workshop, you've got them in groups, and you want them to complete this activity. And the activity might be list as many social, economic, and environmental ethical implications of generative AI use as possible. Categorize them as positive, neutral, negative, or neutral. Now, your task at first would be to let them loose on their own. Okay, let them go through and create that list, but then explicitly connect to these processes. Think about thinking first. One, guide the students, have they solved the right problem? Do they understand the wording? Is the wording correct? What techniques are you going to use to come up with this list? Now, you might be teaching a whole range of brainstorming techniques in your subject, or maybe in a previous subject that this is scaffolding on. Help students bring that connection of those previous frameworks into the way that they're doing this. Next is, once they've completed this task, is AI a useful tool to go beyond what they were able to do before? And if it was, you need to start working through the ethical implications. Okay, so in this case here, if we're looking about lists, we are going to be extracting data from AI. We're not going to be uploading any information. So there's no data privacy risks, but there are bias risks associated. And there could be, depending on what your learning objectives, other ethical implications such as power usage, environmental, so forth, that you want to bring into the discussion. It's all based on your learning objectives. And before you move on, you need to ask students questions. How did you learn? What did you learn for this activity, and so forth? You then move to the AI stage, where you can say, use your generative AI. Now, increase the number of implications. Do they belong to the same categories? And the students will go through and complete the activity. And generally what you will get is students more or less typing the question out. And what they will get for most students is something that looks along those lines. A list of 10, 15 different implications, and you'll see that some of them they already have, some of them they don't. And this is where the guidance from the staff member occurs. It's like, okay, you've got this information. Let's look at it across our groups. And you will see that, there's great disparity. There's a few groups with 15, 20, there's one group with 5,000. You start having discussions like, okay, why has one group got 15 implications? Why has another group got 5,000? What was the difference in the prompt? What is the difference in the output? Is it even reasonable to have 5,000 implications? What adjustments need to be made? What error checking needs to be made? And so forth. Then you start talking about the learning. By asking AI to create this list, did you actually learn anything by producing this list, and so forth? Then you come to the third part, which is the most important. And that's the synthesis of what they did in part 1 and part 2. And getting them to apply the evaluative judgment, connecting to traditional sources, refining, validating, applying human touches, responsibility and control, and again, reconnecting with the learning. How did students learn completing this activity? And the final part is that class reflection, discussion, and connecting to assessments or other activities. So the activity is not just about learning, but if you design it correctly, it's about developing AI literacy, and more importantly, it's about connecting students to the thinking process. How do you learn? How does the activity impact my learning if I do each stage? Now, I have resources, detailed instructions, template slides, etc., that can guide you through this process, where I take that example that I just shown you, but into a lot more detail. So if you want to move forward, please feel free to follow the resource. So I teach postgraduate master's subjects at UOW, and all engineering students in the postgraduate level complete these 2 core subjects. In the first subjects, we look at AI ethics, we look at metacognition and AI learning and generative GenAI basics. And in the second subject, we scaffold what we learned there and we apply co-intelligence and generative AI literacy to every single aspect of open-ended project work. Through repetition, we get students to understand the processes, to help them understand how to use AI ethically and in ways that support their learning and not replace it. So my 5th key takeaway is that generative AI is not about automation. The biggest benefit is not automation in higher education. It's about teaching students that if they use it as a reflective tool, they can learn with it and not from it. So I'm going to stop there and have some discussions on what we talked about. In the next part, we're going to start to unpack learning techniques and assessments that work alongside generative AI. So I'll just stop. Okay, so now we move to offense. We've covered risks, defense. Now, how do we use AI for learning and assessment? And as I talked about in the questions, answer to the questions before, it really requires a multitude of different strategies. One of the advantages that universities have is that most are face-to-face, and there are still things that AI can't do that humans can do. And there are many opportunities to transition or create a better focus on what are those human capabilities. A lot of technical degrees have laboratories. There are great opportunities to increase our emphasis on laboratory work, and not so much just on the cognitive, but also on the psychomotor and affective components of learning. And if you're looking at that, the paper that I have QR coded helps you see the spectrum of activities, as well as what are the types of assessments that actually measure those different competencies. So part 1, what are the human competencies that we can concentrate? Now, I talked about the way that students are currently using it to learn. The next bit is to provide guidance, examples to demonstrate what are better ways of using AI to learn. And if we look at practice by doing, it is good to show students how to use it to as a tutor, but not in a way that it provides me all the information, but through that Socratic process where it's helping me work out the problems, but it's not giving me the answer. It's pushing me as far as I can go before it gives me that answer. And that really requires students to engage with it so they can understand how that works. Now, anyone who teaches knows that the best way to learn content is to teach it for others. And generative AI provides a huge opportunity to allow students to teach content to someone else without feeling embarrassed or as part of their learning journey. And the best way of using it at the moment is to get the student to become the teacher, the AI to become the student. And the student teaches the AI the content, and the AI provides that scaffolding or corrects them when they're going down the wrong path. Now, currently, depending on your topic area, you still have to be aware of hallucinations. Something like programming will have a high accuracy rate, mechanics, you can expect to see a lot of errors there still, but it's constantly changing. But these approaches, if you get them to thinking about how to use the technology to aid their learning, are a starting point. The next is about thinking about what is the student outcome from the activity that you are going to undertake. And then you connect it to what is the role of the AI and what mode do you need to create it. So if you want to focus on reasoning, you might look at a Socratic process. If you want to look at innovation, you might be looking at a co-creation process. If you're looking at adaptability, it might be an AI environment. So you need to adjust. You can't use one approach for everything, which is common even before AI. One thing about the CAC Co-Intelligence is that you can use these different modes within it. So, for example, if you were to look at the three-step process, in the AI component, if your learning objective was to help students with their thinking, you would apply a Socratic component in there. So the augmentation is about interrogating the student's thinking, okay? If you were looking at the output, you would go for an adversarial approach where the AI is attacking the output that you're creating or going to create. Another approach might be the decision-making process. Then you'd use a centaur approach. Which are the processes that you should be doing, which process should the AI be doing? And that all fits here, which kind of comes to the bit of answering the question I had previously about the video and how would you do it? It really comes down to what is your learning objective? Which way do you want to use AI to support that activity, if that makes sense? Now, as I mentioned, I use it in a subject, Engine 982, which is an open-ended project work subject. It is based on students working as a team of consultants, solving a real problem for a real company. Now, there are two types of project problem-based learning. The great thing about project-based learning is that it focuses on the application of knowledge. So you learn all this information, now we want you to apply it. So it's really good for third year, fourth year type students. And the type of knowledge that a student needs to apply can come from many sources, from their experiences, from their subjects, from academic and non-academic literature, and it can also come from the knowledge from generative AI. Regardless of where it comes from, the student needs to apply critical thinking to synthesize that knowledge. And the great advantage of open-ended projects is that there is no answer at the back of the book. Whatever the AI says, there is an alternative solution. So that synthesis that verification, that justification of why becomes especially important. So if we look at assessing this work, so this is an assessment for learning. We're getting students to learn the process of applying the CAC Co-Intelligence. The first approach would be to ban AI. And this is almost impossible. All it will do is create workload for me. How can you guarantee that something was written with AI? How can you guarantee that it's not? You know, the AI checkers, etc., don't work. The only students you're catching are the ones that are least capable, and so forth. So the only option is to allow it. But if I allow it, the expectations have to increase. You can't have the same expectation. So previously in this subject, before AI was introduced, all I wanted students to do is to make sure that they were aware that they had to think about standards in their design solution. I would expect them to have one or two, have a little bit of understanding. Now that they can use AI, I expect them to have a comprehensive list. More or less nothing should be missing. And the ones that they use should be the right ones. And the reasons and how they're going to use those standards is detailed. So what I have taken is something that was already in place and pushed the students further. And to get all of this correct is not so easy of just typing in a prompt. It does require that high level evaluative judgment. Because if you don't know what the answer is, because there's no answer in the back of the book, that requires work from you. So the change that happened is that I wanted them to become aware of standards, but now the evaluation becomes much more advanced. So the key takeaway for number 7 is you need a learning uplift. Just like before the calculator, after the calculator, what expectations we have from students in terms of how far we push them has advanced. If we're going to integrate AI, we need to be thinking, how do we push students further? How do we increase expectations for those learning, assessment for learning activities? If you're interested and work with project work, we have developed with 9 different universities the Project Work Artificial Intelligence Integration Framework, or PAVE. QR code is on there, which breaks up a project into all the various stages. You just pick and choose the stage that you want and you implement it. I have a whole range of videos already in place that show how you can apply the different stages of project work using the CAC Co-Intelligence work. So you won't be able to find resources anywhere. If you want to learn the process, feel free to look at those videos. Another example for assessment for learning is in a subject, the students have to create a video communicating a given AI ethical implication to their peers in the most creative and original way possible. Any tool, including generative AI, can be used. The first stage of the video is focused on them doing research with AI or not AI, or whichever way, on developing ethical awareness. The next stage is them communicating the information. In other words, teaching the content to somebody else, which, as we learned before, is about improving learning and retention. And through this process, there are a whole range of different skills, such as resilience, creative thinking, motivation, technological literacy, etc., that they're incorporating. They are learning all of these capabilities while they're completing the assessment. Now, at the end of the day, we are, in effect, assessing on their capability to merge all of this, but the assessment really is focused on guiding them to be able to bring all these different skills together. Probably one of the most at-risk assessments in most degrees at the moment is the thesis, if you have one. So engineering, we do. So what we had to do is think about a hybrid approach. So what we have now moved towards is a 3-pillar policy, where it's a combination of assessment for learning and assessment of learning. And students must pass all 3 pillars. If they don't, don't pass the subject, investigations required, etc. So in essence, there are 3 stages. The first is supervisor marks. So the supervisor must more or less provide undertake an oral viva of the student along the way. They are providing guidance, but they're also checking student understanding and what they are doing. In effect, it is a mark of process over product. We still have the product, and that gets marked by a supervisor and a third marker. We have found that it's very important that the supervisor be one of the markers. I know some universities don't like the supervisor be a marker, but it's important because what we have realized is that if the product deviates a lot from what the student capability is, it's the supervisor that's going to be able to flag it, not the academic who's not associated with that student. And then what we have is we have the exhibition where the artifact and understanding occur through a defense type process. So we need different approaches for different activities, but when it comes to thesis, there is no going away from the fact that it's uncontrolled. Students will use AI. Students are told that they can use AI using the CAC Co-Intelligence process and understanding that these 3 pillars are in place. If you would like more examples of how teachers are using AI across the spectrum, we have a whole showcase of different examples. Feel free to see that at a2i.org. And that leads us to the end of the presentation, the end of part 3, which pretty much brings us perfect timing and enough to have a final discussion. So I will stop. Just a big thank you to everyone for your time. Well, I hope this video provided some guidance on what you need to think about if moving towards a 2-lane system. Feel free to share your thoughts in the comment section. If you like this video, make sure you like and subscribe. I'm Dr. Sasha Nikolic, and thank you for watching.